Hello, and welcome once again to a wonderful Wednesday webinar for the Climate Emergency Centre Network. Today, the wisdom being dispensed is by a very esteemed, should we say, amazing campaigner who's been active like myself since the 90s, Stephen Joseph. He's currently working with the University of Hertfordshire Smart Mobility Unit, but previously he was the CEO of the Campaign for Better Transport, which did a massive amount to shift some of the discussions, shall we say, on transport, and also a fellow campaigner from the 90s. So Stephen's going to tell us a bit of his the journey and the latest things on transport. Over to you, Stephen. Thank you so much for coming. Over.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for inviting me, Phoenix, to this. I hope you'll find this interesting. So this is me. Phoenix has already said some of this. Professor at the University of Hertfordshire, Smart Mobility Unit. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm a transport policy consultant now, and I was CEO of the Campaign for Better Transport. I put the website there. And I'm currently trustee and chair of a grant-making trust called the Foundation for Integrated Transport. So we give funding to, we have been funding groups with who are campaigning on transport, including Campaign for Better Transport and also the Transport Action Network, who are a very important group in this area, as we'll say. What I'm going to do is to talk through transport and climate and where it sits and why we need to do things and why we need to do more things than just electric cars, but also to talk about practical things that are going on and things that could be, people can pick up on and do something about. And that's in rural as well as urban areas. At the University of Hertfordshire, we've been doing work on transport outside cities and things that can be done there. So I'm not sure how much people need to see this because I think everybody knows this sort of fact. So transport has now overtaken energy as the largest emitting sector in the UK. That graph on the right shows domestic transport flatlining as other areas, notably electricity supply, have fallen. And you'll see on the left that in 2023, domestic transport accounted for 29% of emissions. We'll talk about international aviation and shipping later. Even if it wasn't urgent to do something about transport from a climate change perspective, there are other reasons for doing something about this. Because of air pollution, because all the research, new research on air pollution from vehicles says that impacts are wider than worse than we previously thought. And literally, particulates from diesel emissions especially have been linked to health problems literally from the womb to the grave, to dementia, all sorts of issues. Air pollution is a really important story in this area, a push for action, health impacts from less physical activity, noise, road traffic dominating landscapes and public spaces, road casualties. There's no other area where we accept thousands of deaths and injuries a year as normal. And social exclusion, because those without cars are locked out of society, and that creates loneliness and isolation. Now, to tackling these, the focus at present from governments is on technology, a move to electric vehicles, and the government plans to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, hybrids by 2035, with a zero-emission vehicle mandate that rewards / punishes manufacturers if they do or don't meet increasing targets for electric vehicles. And there are also moves to phase out other vehicles, diesel trucks, buses, motorcycles, and a push for sustainable aviation fuel for planes. But EVs still create emissions from brakes and tires. There are issues with battery components, rare earth, etc. Sustainable aviation fuel really won't cut it for aviation. And although actually the researchers in this area say we do need to do all this, but it's really not going to be enough because decarbonisation needs to go beyond this and towards cutting vehicle mileage. um, and we need that to keep, if we want to continue keeping the now diminishing chance of the Paris target of keeping global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, for the transport elements of the various nationally determined contributions, and for meeting the government's net zero target for 2050 and the 5-year carbon budget. So I put a link in there to one publication that says why we need to do energy demand, not just technology. Now, what that means as a starter is we need to stop making things worse. This government has already authorised the Lower Thames Crossing, a huge road, far bigger and more expensive per mile than HS2 or other big controversial infrastructure schemes, loads of carbon. The government has just made 590 million available for that. Could have bought quite a lot of trams and cycleways for that. But we're also seeing new car-based housing with big new roads, lots of car parking, pedestrians and cyclists treated as second-class citizens. As I'll say, what we're seeing with housing, picture there, houses without pavements, so people aren't expected to walk around new housing estates at all. Reducing tax on fuel, no serious tax on aviation apart from air passenger duty, increased public transport fares, inaccessible trains and buses. Now, it's worth saying something about where the carbon emissions actually are. And what you see there, the yellow with the dots are mileage, and the green are the trips, and the dots are CO2. And the reason this is important is what it shows. The top line, the top graph is domestic travel. And the median graph is international travel, and the bottom is combination in the UK. And what you see here is that a small proportion of longer distance trips by people in the UK account for a high proportion of carbon emissions. And that's true both domestically and internationally. So if you think of long distance travel, over 50 miles, 2.7 trips per head per year, 61% of passenger miles, 69% of greenhouse gas emissions from personal travel. So actually tackling the small proportion of longer distance trips really matters if we're going to cut CO2. And I'll come back to that later. It's also the case that carbon emissions outside cities matter. Shower County's transport carbon emissions per head are double those in London, 2/3 higher than metropolitan districts. Urban rural districts, as they're classified outside conurbations, account for 60% of the population, 72% of transport carbon. So we need to worry about emissions outside cities as well as emissions in cities as well. And we need to worry about the longer distance trips. Now, the good news, and this is what I really want to focus on, is that there are options for tackling all these, because it is possible to have good public transport in rural as well as urban areas. Active travel, walking, wheeling and cycling can be a real option for travel, again, outside as well as inside cities. New technology can bring new travel options, and new housing doesn't have to be car-based. And what you'll see there are pictures, and we'll talk about more of them later, of the Sherpa bus in North Wales, buses in Cornwall, cycling along in development, and a demand responsive bus now so successful it's been replaced by a fixed route bus on a new housing estate in Leicestershire. Here are some principles for better transport: making trains, buses better, cheaper, more accessible and linked together, improving active travel so that walking and cycling are real options for shorter journeys, and better linked to public transport, which includes better and less cluttered pavements. Working with travel generators, and I want to talk about this a bit more. Employers, schools, leisure providers, developers to improve alternatives to car use, and more travel options, car clubs, I think somebody just mentioned that, car sharing, bike hire, less car-based development, and more powers and funding for local transport. Now, the starting point for this in terms of making policy is that we need to change the way in which we do transport policy. Traditionally, governments have done forecasts on future traffic growth, and then built roads, sometimes allowed airports based on those. There's a department, but actually they're wrong. DFT forecasts Department of Transport forecasts have always overstated traffic growth. That's an older graph, but it's still true now. Instead, what we need to move towards is what some transport planners are calling vision and validate, where you start with the outcomes you want, like that picture on the bottom left, see what types of investment can be justified to support them. This government has started to move in that direction. It's now formally in the National Planning Policy Framework that developers and those judging developments should do vision and validate rather than predict and provide. We've yet to see what that means in practice. And on climate change, it means we need to move to avoid, shift, improve. Substitute trips. Can I do it online? Can I do it, have it delivered? Can I do it locally? Shift modes. Can I use active travel? Can I use public transport? Can I use shared or on-demand mobility? And only then switch fuels. Can I use electric or hydrogen vehicles? What does that mean in practice? Well, I've put a few things up here. Better local rail services. If you take the St Albans Abbey line near where I live, if you put a passing loop in there, it allow at least a half-hour service. And you're seeing this in Cornwall. Farmers Branch had a passing loop put in. There's a picture of it. The Newquay branch at the moment is now getting a passing loop, which will mean an hourly service through trains, the second platform there, as part of a mid-Cornwall metro project. And that's been entirely promoted by Cornwall Council. It's been very clever at getting money out of the government for it, and the EU when you could get EU funding, but they've been progressively making upgrading their local rail lines, and we'll talk a bit more about what else Cornwall is doing later. And what that means as well is greater accessibility. Now, all the new trains on the Greater Anglia network are accessible. They have ramps to the platforms. That what you see in that top left picture is a ramp comes out from the train so that somebody can wheel themselves onto a train without help. And if you could have that on new trains on the Greater Anglia network, then it ought to be possible to have them everywhere. We need area-wide ticketing for rail, bus and other transport, stations as hubs, gateways for surrounding communities with good active travel links, cycle parking, bus links, etc. And I put a few examples up there of where some of that's happening.
Stephen, just what does area-wide ticketing mean?
So that it means, well, like you have in London, where you get a single ticket that's you can tap on and tap off any public transport. But increasingly, you're starting to see that now elsewhere as well. Manchester has just done that for its buses and trams. Cornwall has it now. So area-wide ticketing as opposed to point-to-point ticketing. Okay, that's a pay-as-you-go Swift card from the West Midlands.
Cool.
And current public transport could be better. And here are some options. Marketing what we have. Some areas there is good public transport, but people don't know about it, so nobody does any marketing. And we can have demand responsive transport, which is where semi-fixed or flexible routes. That's a picture of the Herts Links, which is in North Hertfordshire, and the map is where it serves. And it's now expanded to Fridays and Saturdays. From a carbon perspective, this has been important because 25% of the users are young people going to college in the middle of that map at Buntingford, who were previously chauffeured by their parents because there wasn't any public transport. And another 25% are people who used to drive to those railway stations to commute into London. So there's some clear transfer. This is a clear practical example of carbon reduction from demand responsive transport. But you're also seeing employers getting specialist companies, they call them Zelo, Ride Tandem and so on, who run services or to contract with coaches for services. So Ocado, an example of an employer that does do this. Ride Tandem claim that every vehicle they run has an average occupancy of 32. So they're very well used. and they're outside the public transport network. They're just a contract between employers and others, good employers who want to enlarge the labour market and get people to work without using cars. And you can have bus priority, and we need better walking cycling links to stations. And there are examples from around the country. Sevenoaks, which has local town buses. Hereford, which went for free buses at weekends. They may have stopped that now. And Cornwall, I mentioned Cornwall, and they've been doing what's called the One Public Transport System for Cornwall. Transport for Cornwall, as it's called, an integrated public transport system, and integrated interchanges at stations with real-time information, and also capped fares. So £6, I think it is, to cross the county, £2.50 in certain towns, and they're starting to work about rolling that out elsewhere, and also to neighbouring counties like Devon and Somerset. So, and I'm not saying, because I did a webinar recently for Rural Services Network and was slagged off by people from Cornwall saying it's really not great. And the answer is, of course, it's not great, but it's a lot better than you find in other places, and progress is being made.
Mm.
Now, I mentioned working with employers, and that's partly because a lot of car commuting is quite long distance, and therefore tackling it is really important. And I've called it a Commute Zero initiative, but this is a group called Mobility Ways, came out of Smart, came out of Lift Share, and they've done a measurement of. They can do a measurement of employers. You can do measurements, and we'll see that later. I've given a link later of where you can get your own local carbon emissions from commuting. And they do a lot of car sharing, bespoke bus services, adjust existing buses. They just get the postcodes of employers and say, well, what can we do to bring your car commuting to zero? And of course, some of it is about electric vehicles. And you can see that they benchmark ACEL as an average commuter emission levels. And there's a similar group called Home Run that does this for schools and starts to promote car sharing to schools in rural areas as well. And I mentioned car clubs. Car clubs give access to a car or van when you need one. They're like an alternative, particularly to second and extra cars. And there are car clubs in many places, and some local co-ops. Derwent Valley in the northeast has a car club, for instance, just outside Gateshead. Though insurance is an issue in some cases for some of these. And there's also a growth in peer-to-peer car sharing, where people just agree through a website called HireCar to commit to share the cars as well. That's a picture of a zip car on a street in the in Waltham Forest. I'll come back to Waltham Forest a bit later. As part of the Mini Holland there are car club parking bays on the streets there. And there's also bike hire. Many places also already have bike hire schemes, and it's increasingly not just the big cities. So Watford, I picked Watford as an example because it's well established. They've now got 300 bikes, 72 bays. Bournemouth now has bike hire. There are challenges with these, but they are very successful. And particularly when they include e-bikes, because e-bikes can make cycling easier and more attractive for longer distance journeys for many more people. And we're also seeing a growth in e-cargo bikes being used for deliveries. That's a picture of, that's Cargo Dale, and that's in Todmorden in the Pennines. And they run in, Cargo Dale run in Hebden Bridge as well. It was set up with COVID, actually, to help small businesses continue to deliver goods to people in the town. You can see that, Todmorden and Hebden Bridge are pretty hilly places. And if you can run e-cargo bikes there, you can run them in quite a lot of places. Now, I talked about less car-based development, and I've been involved in a group called Transport for New Homes, which has reviewed the transport impacts of new housing, and it's been doing a series of reports on this. And you can see that, and they've done comparisons with Netherlands and Sweden. I think that might be Freiburg, actually, that bottom right-hand picture, but it's not like some of the other places in that slide. And what we can see from new housing developments surveyed by Transport for New Homes is that we've got car-based development, cowpat developments where buildings are plopped into the middle of fields. People relied on their cars for the majority of journeys, and parking and road access took up so much room because so that you didn't have trees and gardens because there was too little space once you'd had all the car parking, and people drove from car park to car park as well. And there are other emerging themes as well. You had no pavements. That picture on the bottom right is somebody walking from an estate in Wiltshire into the town centre along a 50-mile-an-hour lorry route along a grass verge. And public transport opportunities are missed. And what that means is you need mixed land uses, urban quarters, not rather than isolated developments. That's a picture of Poundbury there. We'll come back to that in a minute. And what the Transport for New Homes have found is lovely master plans, but in reality, you get new roads and car parking. The better practice does exist. Kidbrooke in southeast London, limited parking, places to walk to. Poundbury, 32% of residents walk to work. The local facilities. Shaw Fair in Scotland, built around a new station on the Borders railway line. Dermontthorpe in York, local facilities, good walking routes. New Loversthorpe, as I said, a development west of Leicester, had demand responsive buses from day one, which have been so successful that they're now fixed routes. So there's Transport for New Homes, which has a checklist and shows what's possible. And the implications for new housing: if you have lots of car-based homes, it will make congestion and carbon emissions a lot worse. High quality public transport needs to be at the centre of development, not an afterthought. And the density of developments and the design of developments will be important as well. And there need to be local services and facilities that people can walk or cycle to. I understand the Department for Transport is just about to launch a connectivity tool which will allow people to measure how well connected development sites are. And that, I hope, will be a way of measuring this kind of stuff as well. So if we do that, I mentioned there's also an issue of managing traffic and road space. If we're going to have less single occupancy car use, we need priority on the roads, pedestrian priority, linked up walking network, proper signage, traffic lights, and better crossings. That's a healthy streets diagram from Transport for London, the different features that need to be included to create a healthy street. Proper network of cycle routes, parking, and we may need to remove on-street parking if we're going to give pedestrians, cyclists, buses, e-scooters, disabled drivers. We need to get rid of pavement parking, and we might link that to car clubs as well. Waltham Forest, which has a mini Holland, as it was called, that's a picture of the shopping street in it, which has made it more difficult to drive. You can still drive in there, but more priority for pedestrians and cyclists, has seen 32 minutes extra walking, 9 minutes extra cycling a week compared with other boroughs, and 51,000 households no longer suffer from illegal air pollution. There are still issues on boundary roads there. Tourism and visitor travel. Now, as I said, long distance travel is where most of the carbon is. Leisure travel accounts for the most mileage in the UK, and most of it's by car, and this can change. Snowdonia, Iwithva has pre-booked parking, park and ride Sherpa buses, shuttle buses, and traffic restriction for those without parking. In other words, if you park on the roads with double yellow lines, you will get towed away in the summer months. And there are also now new organisations promoting car-free tourism: Good Journey, Eco Attractions Group, and there's international good practice on sustainable tourism, a group called lowcarbondestinations.org. But travel at destinations easier to change than travel to destinations. So there are ways of doing this, but there are some examples. It's an issue of finance and funding. Nottingham has for years now, more than 10 years, had a levy on parking spaces at employer parking spaces in the city. It's paid by employers with 10 or more spaces. Actually, I put £300 per space per year, but I think it's actually gone up since then. It raises about £9 million a year for transport. It's got three tram lines, electric buses, upgrades to the main rail station, and a high proportion of trips in Nottingham are by public transport. It also has a municipal bus company as well, by the way. So just I wanted to mention about starting points if people are interested. And I think data is always very helpful. I could put a few websites up there. Addresspollution.org will give you a free air quality report for your own address or a high street. Carbon Place is a place-based carbon calculator, which will tell you local carbon emissions. And there's also commuting. The mobility ways map, I mentioned the ASL dashboard before. There are by-car schemes, active travel zones, school streets. I haven't talked much about that, but there are increasing numbers of school streets in cities, but starting to move out as well. 20-mile-an-hour limits are increasingly happening around the place. Famously, Wales has moved to a default 20 miles an hour limit in built-up areas, with priority networks for buses, walking, and cycling, and joining up public transport and adding demand-responsive transport where appropriate. And there's now more talk of, in terms of bringing all this together, mobility hubs, bringing transport together, public transport together with bike hire, car clubs, e-scooter hire, public transport, formal, that's officially scooter hire as opposed to some of the unofficial ones. And there's a group called Como UK, which has been promoting this. Shared, and that's a picture of a mobility hub in Scotland being opened on a new housing development. There's also the concept of total transport, where linking up other transport services, for example, non-emergency patient transport, social services, etc., and joint ticketing information, mobility as a service. Even in the Highlands, there's a Highland app for transport. So there are ways of doing of bringing things together. I'm going to finish shortly. This is just an example of how travel behavior can change. In 2011 to 2015, there was a local sustainable transport fund, the brainchild of the Liberal Democrat Transport Minister Norman Baker, and this was when this was evaluated, it funded a lot of projects all over England, and it found that in those areas, car use fell, adult cycling increased, car commuting fell, carbon emissions fell, projects were very high value for money, and there are other projects that have seen similar behavior change. And actually, it's worth saying that transport is changing worldwide. Cities in other countries are doing things that with their transport. That picture of the captions disappeared. That's a Brazil Changing Streets program. Bogota won a 2022 Sustainable Transport Award. The then mayor of Bogota said that success isn't where poor people get cars, it's where rich people use public transport. And the people, even in Los Angeles, which is very car dependent, has been in a referendum voted for safer streets. Cable cars are used as public transport in Medellin, in Colombia. It's part of their Medellin's recovery from being a drug, of having drug issues. And it is true that moving away from car dependence is a real challenge. Transport can be better and greener. These are the things that you can do. But if this is a climate emergency, we do need to do more. So I picked up something from a group called Transport for Quality of Life, who have said that what we need to meet our carbon targets is we do need more electric vehicles, but we need less road traffic through universal and comprehensive public transport. That picture there, by the way, on the top right, is a tiny village in Switzerland which has a bus service every hour from every day from 6 to 11 p.m., which connects with other bus services and train services. We also need comprehensive active travel, segregated cycleways in urban areas, and along interurban roads. That's a picture of a road outside Copenhagen, which has a segregated cycleway, which is with a big focus on e-bikes. We need to start to talk about road pricing, which Transport Quality Life called an eco levy, paying for potentially free local public transport, but certainly cheap. New developments need to be car free, new local transport levies. And as I've said before, we need to stop projects that make things worse. Extra road capacity, car based development, new runways, cuts in fuel duty, free car parking, and so on. I should have mentioned as well, under things we should do, a frequent flyer levy on flights, moving the air passenger duty into a frequent flyer levy that's been developed by campaigners so that if you take one flight a year, you don't pay any duty. By the time you get to 10 flights a year, you're paying several £100s. So, and by the way, when they did research on that, they discovered that the only postcodes paying those extra several £100 for taking 10 flights a year were some postcodes in Kensington and Chelsea. So, here's a vision for transport: better public transport, paying for transport differently, 15-minute neighbourhoods, community hubs bringing local services together, high quality cycle lanes, local delivery services using electric vans or cargo bikes and links to stations. This is a smart growth, not dumb growth. That's a picture in China, apparently, where a householder resisted having a road built. But increasingly, we're seeing that even Los Angeles is changing what it's doing. London has seen a huge transfer in the last 30 years, where previously cars were the majority of journeys. By 2016, cars were the minority of journeys. And Vienna has seen car use fall dramatically, with a third of journeys on foot or bike, a third by public transport. So, in conclusion, climate change is real, serious, caused by people. Transport is responsible for over a quarter of emissions. I'll probably be arrested by reform for saying this. Action is needed to tackle climate change, including on transport. That will involve changing travel behaviour as well as changing technology. And different parts of the UK, different countries are moving at different paces, and there are many projects to study and learn from. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow. Absolutely amazing, Stephen. That's really, really comprehensive. So much in there. You really know your subject back to front from the 90s onwards.
Bit of a weird question. What an amazing presentation. It was really brilliant, honestly, full of inspiration and stuff. Really great answers that I can show to people that I've got a husband somewhere around and we talk about these things, because I've been trying to get rid of the car. I don't drive anyway, but he does. But we have lots of conversations about it and blah, blah. But one of my issues and my problems is electric car. I hate them because we send people down mines to get the stuff to make the electric cars. For me, it is not an answer. The car share, the very alternative ways of dealing with what we've got is better than going and sending people, unless we make sure that they're treated properly, they've got water to drink, and they're paid properly and stuff like that. But I still think taking stuff out of the planet to make a million more cars so we can have one per person and all that rubbish, sharing is a lot better. Anyway, carry on.
I'd agree in principle, but in practice, this is a climate emergency, and even the researchers who are really strongly in favour of all the other things I've talked about also think we may need to shift to electric vehicles simply in order to, to reduce carbon emissions from transport. But what they're saying is we need to do other things as well.
I've got a little input there. Thank you, Stephen. I hope that helps there, Diane. I mean, what's to say? Stephen, like myself, has been a long-term transport and environmental campaigner. We need to see this as a big integrated, project and process. And I think what Stephen's gone through there is absolutely phenomenal overview, really, over many years of transport and how things have changed and how we really need a very integrated transport program that brings in all of these different factors that he's shown us that are happening around the country and in parts around the world. And personally, I'm very aware of the coltan and the issues going on with the digging for electric vehicles. But we need to have all these other things working as well, or the buses, the trains, the bicycle lanes, how the car share systems. How do we link all those up to reduce our car transport, car share systems and things like that? Back from the old Reclaim the Streets days back in the 90s, we were calling for more public spaces to be pedestrianised and bicycle lanes and all the rest. And now, 30 years later, Camden High Street has been pedestrianised by the council. So it's funny how the cycles go round. But last couple of bits, free public transport was one of the things that was in Stephen's presentation up there. Very big firm believer that. Some of the old crew will tell you about London back in Ken Livingstone's days had 10 pence for a bus thingy or something.
Well,
And Germany, sorry, last one, Germany gave €9 for any train anywhere in Germany, and their car transport went down by 20% or something.
yeah.
Even then, Camilla.
It's I mean, I said free public transport because several places have been trying it, but there is an argument that, you know, if you've got money to spend on things, you should increase frequency rather than necessarily make public transport completely free. There's a lively debate about this one, I can tell you. By the way, somebody said that the air pollution link didn't work, and you're right. I put one that I think does in the chat. Sorry about that. Last time I tried it, it did work. I don't know what's happened since. But anyway, there are a number of places actually where you can find air pollution things. But free public transport. I mean, as I say, Dunkirk is one town in France that has done this. The mayor of Dunkirk said that the reason he did it was to essentially have money being, not being spent on oil companies locally. And going into, fuel, and instead getting people to ride public transport. But as I say, there's a lively debate about this one, even from sustainable transport campaigners. As I say, it's an argument that says actually you should fund frequency rather than free public transport. But anyway, transport quality of life is really keen on free, so I put it up there.
That's good feedback. Over to Camilla. Lovely to see you, Camilla.
Hi. Just a quick one, Stephen. I'm just wondering what your response was to Rachel Reeves' announcement about more funding and sort of integrating transport and rail, particularly in the north.
Yes, I mean, some of what she's done is, it's overdue, because the north has been really shortchanged by its public transport. This is a bit of an anecdote, but when I was at the Campaign for Better Transport, we helped Northern leaders run a campaign to replace the old Pacer trains in the north as part of a new Northern rail franchise. And the then Transport Secretary had to formally overrule the civil servants and issue a ministerial direction to do that, because on Department for Transport models, the north was going to carry on declining, so it wasn't worth investing there. So anyway, but we now have a situation where, well, actually the railway line across the Pennines is being electrified now, and I think Leeds might get a tram on about the 4th or 5th attempt to trying. Leeds has really been shortchanged on this. It's, I think, the largest city in Europe without a tram system, and we're starting to see extensions of that. My old organisation, Campaign for Better Transport, along with a group called Create Streets, have been running a campaign to make trams the centre of new housing developments and to make it easier and cheaper to build trams. Their argument is, in France, a mayor gets elected in a city on a platform of building a tram, and at the end of their 5-year term, trams are built. And the reason they don't happen here is because of regulation. That one of the things they discovered was that tram rails have to be laid to take 48-ton lorries, and 48-ton lorries aren't even allowed, and they certainly don't run in most streets where trams run, heavy lorries. So and the utilities are allowed to basically gold plate what happens in any street where a tram's being put. So these drive up costs here compared with other countries. And of course, because there isn't a kind of program of tram building, each tram scheme costs a lot. So it's possible to do trams. Leeds is, I hope, about to get one. And one of the good things about the Rachel Reeves announcement was that it did involve trams and better public transport in some other cities too. Against that, as I've mentioned, the government is putting money into the Lower Thames Crossing and potentially other road building. We need to see what the detail of all of that is. and that's where that's going to add to carbon significantly.
Thank you.
Cool. Very comprehensive for us. You really know your stuff back to front, Stephen. That's brilliant. Thank you for all your many years of campaigning. Helen, and anyone else, if you've got a question or feedback or a comment, you can raise your hands down the bottom of the little heart-shaped reaction tab. Helen, lovely. There's the Leeds team beaming in. You have to unmute, Helen. Welcome.
Yeah, so coming from Leeds, our big problem is that when all the other places were saying, oh, we'll put in a metro or whatever, Leeds decided to become the motorway city. So we've got motorways all over the place. But anyway, and inner ring roads that get flooded and God knows what, awful. My big problem with all of this is it's the bicycles. I put earlier on, I used to cycle as a kid. I used to, go out a lot. Now, a couple of miles on the bicycle, I'm in agony. So you've got to, we need sort of, I don't know, sort of more sitting down in bucket seats and four-wheeled bicycle type things. We need a lot more development into that kind of thing. Something that you can stick grandma in the back, or it's
like the Dutch bikes, the Buckfast with the big cargo thing, or
yeah, because think of the pregnant mum who's got a toddler already and trying to get the shopping home. That's never going to work on the bicycle.
No, firstly, I mean, like Phoenix just said, there are some different designs of bicycles, including electric bikes. Actually, I see from your earlier comment, Helen, you bought an electric bike but rarely use it because you get backache.
Yeah.
I think there are designs. I'm not an expert on this,
No.
but there are designs that shouldn't give you backache. It's worth taking a look. And actually, there's a.
I think it's modern bicycles. They're all these handlebars. I much prefer your old sit-up and beg ones.
Yeah, it's really hard. But I mean, in general, electric bikes do kind of help people get up hills and things like that in a way that.
Because you need that round near me. It's. I just looked while they were talking, and we've got a railway station in Morley, but it's about an 18-minute walk to it and a half-hour walk back, because you're coming up nearly 100 meters.
Yeah.
In that walk, so you really do need things like that round here.
Yeah.
It needs all of the things that Stephen went through integrated, really, I think.
Yeah.
Just to say,
even the bus that would go to the railway station would be
well,
good.
I was about to say a bus to the railway station would be good.
Yeah.
I should say that Leeds University, which is a large transport studies institute, is doing a project looking at making Leeds a city where you don't need to use a car. What would be needed? I mean, talking to lots of people about it.
Paul Chatterton will be on that one, because the Friends of the Earth have got a campaign to try and get this fare-free buses. And Paul Chatterton's reaction is Professor of Urban Futures there was like, we were on this in 2019, but it still hasn't happened.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, there's a whole project there.
Go on, Stephen, sorry, and then I've got a question.
Sorry, was somebody else about to ask?
I don't know if you wanted to finish what you were saying there, Stephen.
No, it's fine. No, it's just that, as I say, there's Helen might be interested to look up what's going on there, but it sounds like you're in there already.
Yeah. It'll be Anne's here as well. He used to work for Possible. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. So yeah.
The question on it was about, when they actually make, if in some areas they've made either very low cost or free public transport. I think the example I use, I don't have the exact facts and figures on it because I read about it quite a while ago, but what was it? Germany created that anywhere within Germany for like 9 or 10 euros, a very low amount, might have been 15, 20 euros.
It was €9. They then put it up but there is still a case for this. I think that
How
the
much does it
issue
come
with,
down? The pollution.
because basically the states and the central government argued about who was going to pay for it. So it's but several countries have been doing cheaper free fares as part of the response to cost of living. I mean, to be fair, we did get the £2 bus fare, now £3, which has made a difference.
Thanks to Tracy Brabin.
Yeah, well, that's right. Tracy Brabin and Andy Burnham started that, and the last government kind of was shamed into following.
Correction, Friends of the Earth started that. We used to pick it outside Tracy Brabin's meetings.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's very good. That's right. I remember that campaign. Anyway, yeah. So, but you've seen cheap fares in countries like Spain, and I've mentioned some cities in France, and the German ticket as well. And what we need, I mean, there is a lobby to be had, I think, of when eventually the new Great British Railways is set up and the railways are renationalised, of just getting back to some of the national offers that we used to have, and not some of the extraordinarily complex fares we've got now, and very expensive. Well, some of them are very expensive, some of them are cheap, but yeah, finding the cheap ones is really difficult. Anyway, there's a need to drastically simplify the fare structure, and make them and actually have much cheaper fares, because actually very few people pay those high fares, the headline fares on the websites. So I don't know why we have them, really. Anyway.
Can you just clarify that you said the Great British Railways and renationalised? I mean, maybe you've got the latest info on that more than me. Where are we at with that? Are they actually going to be
the train operators? Well, Southwest Trains has just gone back into public ownership, and the rest are gradually going back over the next few years, bar a few local open access operators like Hull Trains. And as important, actually, there's the you'll actually get more integration between train and track. I heard the other day a really terrible story about Filey Station near Scarborough, which has a lovely all-over roof, a Network Rail, which has which manages the sort of ground landlord role on that station, beautifully redecorated the roof. But because Northern Trains, which stops there, is responsible for the station buildings. The station buildings are still really dilapidated because it was a different contract, you see, and hopefully some of those some of those nonsenses will be ironed out, and hopefully, anyway, the legislation. There's a consultation out on legislation. I think the legislation is due next year.
Great. Well, that's good. Is there any way we can find out about that? Type in Great British Railways or anything? Or?
Well, I think my old organisation, Campaign for Better Transport's keeping track on some of this stuff.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, that's a positive note, actually, to the tail end of things. I think. Is there anyone else got one last quick comment, question, or feedback?
I just wanted to respond to Daniel's points about lower speeds, and yes, I mean, you could lower the national speed limit to 50. You're starting to see 50-mile-an-hour limits coming in air pollution areas like Sheffield, for instance, on the M1. If you go over there, it's 50 miles an hour. But Wales did move towards the 20 miles an hour limit against enormous opposition locally, but in practice, deaths on Welsh roads. I just wanted to mention this because it's been so controversial. People will have read about it. Deaths and injuries on urban roads in Wales have fallen by a quarter since the 20 miles an hour limit came in. And it's worth saying that the current transport minister allowed councils to do a consultation on going whether they want people wanted some roads to go back to 30, and in some councils almost nobody, no roads are going back to 30 because everybody wants to keep them. So it's just worth saying that low speeds are important, are popular, whatever local politicians might say.
Okay, that's brilliant, Stephen. Very comprehensive. Just sort of final things. We're coming up pretty much to time, but just to say thank you. I will come over to you for parting comments or your tail end, however you want to sum up. But thank you so much for a really comprehensive look at, over many years how we can integrate many different things into the transport system. There's quite a lot of amazing websites there. We'll post them on the chat afterwards. But I suppose the one last thing I wanted to ask over to you for your final comments was, what can we do as campaigners and as a network and as citizens do to kind of improve transport? What would you reckon? We would go to the Campaign for Better Transport website?
Oh, I think of course, support national campaigns like Campaign for Better Transport and Transport Action Network, who are fighting the road schemes. But I also think that people might, I did put in the presentation some starting points about seeing what local employers are doing, thinking about schools, just really practical stuff that might make a difference locally. And I'm sure that a lot of the people here seem to be seasoned campaigners, so they may well know all this, but I thought I'd put some up there, and particularly things like car sharing. I mean, that's really important actually, because it gets, our car occupancy levels are very low. Average car occupancy levels are very low, and if you get more journeys, particularly longer journeys, with more people in them, it actually does reduce carbon significantly, which is why I mentioned workplace and school travel, things like that.
Okay.
I think the slides will be made available afterwards, Phoenix. Maggie's asking.
That would be great, yeah. I'll send you a link to the WhatsApp chat. Maybe want to post it. Helen, you got time for a very quick one, because we're going to give Joseph.
Yeah, just a quick thought. Having spoken to our MP, he says anything you want doing, the person to go for, if you've got one, is your West Yorkshire mayor or your Liverpool mayor or whatever, because they're the ones with the money.
I think that increasingly,
not council, not MP.
No, I think increasingly the mayors are going to get more powers and money on this sort of thing. It's just worth saying, sorry, I should have said this. It's almost too obvious. Andy Burnham re-regulated the buses. Tracy Braben is moving in the direction of re-regulating the buses. Other mayors are doing the same. Interestingly, some of the Reform and Conservative mayors who were elected recently are also re-regulating the buses in places like Lincolnshire and Cambridgeshire. So I think, and that's the result of local pressure, actually. There was a big Cambridge Sustainable Travel Alliance that pushed all the candidates for mayor, including the what eventually winning Conservative, to do this, and he's said he's going to do that, as well as do a cheap fair deal for young people, for under 22s, and that's as a result of lobbying and campaigning. So I think your MP's right about that.
All right. Thank you very much. Really, really comprehensive, Stephen, and thank you for all your decades of campaigning to decrease the pollution and increase the public transport. Is there a last final words you want to say? Anything? And
yes, there's one completely non-transport related thing for this audience, which I wouldn't mind, Phoenix, if you wouldn't mind putting the word out on this. There's a new organisation called Our Grandchildren's Climate, which I'm on the board of, with the aim of which is to have the voice of older people who want action on climate heard, and it's just been set up, and I'll send you the link, Phoenix, and you can send it out to your network if people want to find out about it. If you Google Our Grandchildren's Climate, you'll find it.
Right, if someone can put that in the chat, we'll end it there. Thank you so much, Stephen. Absolutely amazing.